I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today we are speaking with Aly Raisman about her documentary Darkness to Light on Lifetime as part of our Meet the Experts TV documentary panel. The first question I wanted to ask you is, did you have, you talk about in this documentary support networks for survivors of this kind of trauma, and I was wondering if what sort of support network were you able to rely on when you were first coming to terms with what had happened to you?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. We talk a lot in Darkness to Light about the importance of having a support system and a community. And I recognize that a lot of people don't feel that they have a support system or a community, and it can be really hard to find. I think that I'm still navigating finding my complete support system. I do feel very fortunate that I had people around me that supported me and believed me when I first came forward. I had people in my life that didn't support me, which is so painful. And I think, many survivors can agree that when you are not supported, when you share your experience with someone and your story and you're not believed, it can feel it's so re-traumatizing. And so I can't stress enough how important having that support system is. But even right now in my everyday life, I still have so many ups and downs, and I'm still kind of navigating and coming to terms with everything, and just kind of still trying to have balance. So, sometimes I call my mom or my friends, and I work with a therapist. I think that's really important. So I definitely rely on my support system very heavily, even to this day.
So the other thing I'm curious about is, was it difficult to find survivors who were willing to talk about their experiences on a national stage? And that's my question. Yeah.
It's so interesting. It honestly was not difficult. I think if anything, it was the opposite, where it was actually so difficult for us to navigate who to have on the show, because there's so many survivors out there, and we featured a bunch of survivors on the show, but obviously there are like millions and millions and millions of survivors out there that are struggling and suffering, and so many I think wanted to be on the show because they felt it would be healing. And I found that a lot of survivors, because they didn't really have that support system to be able to be in front of a camera crew and have the opportunity to be listened to and to be able to share their story to the camera. And I also think we're living in a time right now where, of course, there's still mental health and abuse. There's still such a stigma around talking about it. But I do think that there is a space online where a lot of people are really supportive. So I hope that the survivors still feel to this day that it was healing for them. I imagine for myself, even, it's very triggering. So I'm sure for some of the survivors, like, it's kind of feels like can be like an open wound, but everyone, I think, is in a different place in their healing journey. But I think that if anything, I think for us, we wanted to have on like every single person that I've ever met. I have so many people share their stories with me at the airport, the grocery store, events. And so I think a lot of people really want to feel heard and validated. And it just really motivates me to hopefully continue to do more shows or produce more content that shines a light on people that don't normally have the platform that I have, because there's so many people out there that have amazing stories. And I think the show really shows that no matter who you are, I think everyone's story is so important and is going to have such a powerful impact, whether or not they realize it.
What would you say is the big, and I'm sure there are a bunch of them, but what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about sexual assault?
That's a good question. I'm so curious what other survivors would answer to this question, because I imagine that it totally depends on each survivor's experience. I think that one that just comes to the top of my head right off, right as I'm sitting here, is that I just don't think people understand how common abuse is. I struggle to find women in my life that haven't had a bad experience of some kind of sexual harassment or some type of abuse. And I can't even think right now off the top of my head of someone who hasn't experienced some type of trauma that I know, whether if it's not sexual abuse, there's so many different traumas that people can experience. So I don't think people realize how many people are struggling and battling something. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that I think that whether or not we realize it, we all know somebody, the statistics show that's struggling, and they just might not have, they might not feel safe to do so yet. And I think that's why it's so important to continue to have these conversations. And I also think there's a terrible, there's this terrible, I'm blanking on the right word. I don't know if the right word is misconception, where, you know, a lot of times when women come forward, they say you're asking for it, or how much do you have to drink, or what were you wearing? And I think that's very damaging and very dangerous, because it prevents people from feeling comfortable to share their story. Survivors often already feel so much shame and guilt. And so it puts the blame on the survivor, and it enables the abuser to keep harming other people. So I think that the more we can talk about stuff, and the more we can destigmatize abuse, it's such a hard thing to talk about, but I think the more we can listen to other people's experiences, the more we can understand, because I don't think we even realize how common it really is.
Yeah, like other people, like whenever people come forward, you have the people putting the onus and the blame on people that are saying, hey, this happened to me.
Yeah, and I actually have found through experiences, sometimes I've actually met people who are, you know, victim shaming or blaming the survivor, and I actually know that person, and I know that person is a survivor too. So sometimes when I speak to survivors, you know, of course it's a horrible feeling to be gaslit and to feel blamed for something that it's not never the survivor's fault. I think also sometimes that when survivors are not ready to come forward with their own experience, or just know how to navigate what they've been through, I've actually seen survivors victim blame other survivors because I think that it's triggering for them and they don't want it to come up. So I also, for myself, if I see somebody that's shaming me, you know, sometimes I try to realize, okay, maybe this person is, you know, I'm reminding them or I'm triggering them of what happened to them. But sometimes I'm, you know, not in that place mentally, and I'm not able to remember to give people the benefit of the doubt. And then also, you know, I think everyone grows up in different environments, and, you know, maybe someone grew up, maybe they aren't a victim of abuse, but maybe they grew up, you know, and people were always blaming them for everything. And so they just think that everything is their fault. So then they blame other people. So I just try to remember, I think we are all battling so much different mental health stuff. And I do believe that most people are really doing the best that they can at the end of the day. And hopefully, you know, the show that we did is kind of helps to start the conversation. I think that what I saw from some feedback was that a lot of people actually realized that they had been abused, which I take that very seriously. And that's really scary to sit there and watch a show and realize that it actually happened to you as well. So I think the more conversation around healing, the more people can take care of themselves, but also hopefully be more accepting to other people.
You know, you know, what you were saying, you know, reminds me of one of the things that probably shocked me most about this in this documentary was the way in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the way when the Dr. Bartow was his name, when he was first, when the allegations first were made about him, how that community rallied around him. And I felt so bad for, I can't remember the one woman's name who was the color guard, who was on the color guard and, you know, had to wear the ribbon, you know, in support of him. And
Yeah,
I didn't know if she got an apology from the school about that.
do I know?
You know, yeah, I was wondering if you.
You know, I'm not sure, but unfortunately, what happened to Erica and the other survivors, and how the town seemed to rally around an abuser, is far too common. And it's really, it's devastating. You know, as I mentioned, you know, support is so crucial to a survivor's healing, and you know, how a survivor heals can be linked to how their abuse is handled. So it's so important to feel supported and believed. But, you know, what's also horrific is that by them supporting the abuser instead of the survivors, this abuser was unfortunately had access to hurting more children and traumatizing more children. And, the whole family or the whole entire support system around the child is affected. It impacts everyone. When someone is abused, their loved ones are affected because, trauma is very real and very serious. And so, in my experience with my own experience of abuse, I felt that, the organizations that and the adults around us that were supposed to take care of us rallied around our abuser instead of supporting us. And so I've just learned, unfortunately, that oftentimes when an abuser has many victims, there's unfortunately, oftentimes it's a lot of adults are enabling that abuse to happen. And that's really devastating to see. And I think another misconception is a lot of times I see online people say, well, why didn't they speak up? And if you really look at, with the experience of my abuse and the survivors that had the same abuser as me, and same with in the show that we discussed in Pennsylvania, there were so many people that spoke up over the years, and people just didn't listen, and they chose to believe the abuser over the survivors. But I also want to say that question of why didn't people speak up, I also think is so unfair, because we have to be more empathetic and realize that, first of all, that question is why so many people don't speak up, because they don't want to feel shamed for speaking up too late or too soon. And there's no such thing. Whenever a survivor feels safe to come forward, that's the right time for them. And I think that's really important. So those questions can be really damaging. And I think that the more we can have these conversations, hopefully the more survivors can feel supported and feel safe to come forward. And hopefully adults will have a better idea of warning signs or red flags to look for if they are concerned that an adult is abusing someone.
Well, Aly, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel later.
Thank you so much.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I am speaking today with Donny Jackson from the Apple TV Plus documentary series Dear, as part of our Meet the Experts panel for TV documentaries. First question I want to ask is, how do you go about finding the people to write these incredible letters to the trailblazers that you're covering?
Well, shout out to my story hunters and social media, because it's been a right crop of excited people who are really, really fans of and devotees of and admirers of some of the people that we're featuring. And so social media has been an amazing font of letter writers.
So do they just put out a thing on social media saying, hey, are there, or look for fans of these people that have posted about them?
They're actually a lot more surgical than just going out to kind of a broad stroke of it, because you end up getting a lot of people who are fans, but haven't necessarily been inspired in a specific way, and are not necessarily taking that inspiration and paying it forward. So they're a little bit more meticulous in looking for stories that have been posted, looking for articles that have been written, looking for people who know other people who have been inspired. So it's a fairly sophisticated search.
Were there any subjects that you've had on the series so far that were reluctant to be a part of to participate in this?
No, I'll say that the people that we reach out to in the main are super excited about it, because it's a rare opportunity to talk about some of the things that they haven't talked about before, that have inspired them to do what they're doing. And I think people are excited in particular about having an opportunity to respond to letters that have been written to them. It's a different way of dealing with the typical fan-based culture, where these admirers are really talking about how they've been moved by a particular person, and then how they've tried to take that particular seed of inspiration and share it in some way with the world. And so it's actually been fairly easy to get people excited about it. Schedules, being what they are, sometimes that's certainly an issue, and we want a diverse slate of people, not just people who are entertainers, not just people who are athletes. So, it varies in terms of ethnicity and age and background. And so it's a lovely opportunity to reach out to people.
Was there a reaction of a celebrity reading one of the letters to them that really caught you off guard when you while they were reading it?
Absolutely. The one that comes to mind is Laird Hamilton. Laird Hamilton is an alpha male, the most famous big wave surfer on earth. And he's carved from granite. and so I was expecting, a jock. I was expecting a bro. And it was really moving to watch him be touched by these letters to tears, and it wasn't what I was expecting. It was just a really sweet opportunity to see a man allow himself to be vulnerable in a situation. And we're total strangers. We had never met before. And he hadn't met any of the crew. And so it was a level of trust that I was really touched by, and his ability to let himself really feel these letters was remarkable.
So I know there have been a lot of letters that have been read over this series, but what were some of the letters from this series that have stayed with you the most?
Wow, that's a great question. One of the letters that stayed with me the most was written to Billy Porter by a young man in Atlanta who grew up as a boy who identified as gay, but his family was a very rigid Christian family, and they weren't having it. They took him to deprogramming camp, of all things, if you can believe that still exists. But and to hear him share that story, but also be quite resilient in embracing both his faith and his sexuality, and being inspired by Billy Porter to do that very thing, was just amazing. That letter has stayed with me for a very long time.
I think one of the most powerful things of this season, of this second season, came just with time and the fact that this is one of the last things we saw Andre Leon Talley and other than just Andre being Andre, which is just fabulous on its own.
For sure.
Especially those letters, especially I can't remember the person's name who views themselves as like they treat everything about themselves like a piece of art.
Daniel, yeah,
Daniel. That was fantastic, and I'm sure this resonated with other episodes. But did after his passing, and that this was one of the last things, did seeing him in that in this piece, take on another level?
It took on another level for lots of people, because it was literally his last interview, and it took on a great weight and meaning for me, because we remained close after that interview. And the first time I talked to Andre, he was terrible to me. He didn't want to talk. He wasn't interested in answering my questions. And eventually, we got to a place where we were quite close. And after our the final interview, he took me out to soul food in Harlem, and we just had a good old time, which was surreal, to be honest with you, to be hanging out with Andre Leon Talley. But yes, his passing, underscores the size, and I don't mean that in the physical sense, but just the larger than life of Andre and the impact that he had on the world. And I just last a couple weeks ago went to his a celebration of life service, and it was just amazing to see all the people who loved him and who were touched by him, and some of whom had seen the episode, and it was moving for them to have this kind of as a lasting document to reflect on his beautiful life.
So I know I asked you about the letters that caught you off guard, and made you feel very emotional. Were there any that just made you on that stood out to you on a more humorous level, like this is just like so genuine and funny?
You got to go to Bowen Yang writing to Sandra Oh. He's a comic actor, comedian, and his letter, of course, was super funny, where he talks about her having the best faith in the world, And but even with Bowen, that level of humor, retained its humanity and its connection to Sandra, and she was both, tickled by it. One of the things that you don't see in the episode, where she basically texted him to tell him how excited she was to discover that he was one of the letter writers. But we had a good time with that, because there was certainly much more that we could have covered with that. But it was great to have a humorous letter, and it was actually one of the things that I wanted to feature in season 1 that wasn't as much present in season 2 as wasn't as present in season 1, was the humor of it, because that is a human connection, and it is a way of still admiring somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to be as earnest and as beautifully serious as some of the other letters were. So we were tickled to have Bowen in our roster.
So this is a two-part question. Are you hoping to do a 3rd season of the show? And if so, if you could have any anybody on, who would be some of the people that you would want to participate in a 3rd season?
First of all, Charlie, the second question is super unfair, because I have to leave out like 7 billion people. But I would do this show forever. I'm absolutely hoping for a season 3, because I think it's one of those things that just has a thread of humanity through it that is relatable endlessly. You'll never run out of people who have inspired others, and you'll never run out of people who want to talk about that. So having said that, my wish list certainly starts with the Obamas. I would love to have both or either of them in the show. And so if they're watching this, shout out to the Obamas to join us for season 3, which we're hoping will happen.
Well, Donny, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel in just a little bit.
I'm looking forward to it also. Thanks, Charlie.
Take care. I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm speaking with John Hoffman and Janet Tobias, the directors of the documentary Fauci, on which is currently streaming on Disney Plus as part of our Meet the Experts panels on TV documentaries. John, I want to send the first question to you, and then Janet afterwards. How did you each first come to know of Dr. Anthony Fauci?
Wow. I first learned about Dr. Fauci in the early 1990s. I was working at New York Hospital running their HIV/AIDS inpatient and outpatient program. And one of the young doctors in that clinic left to go join Dr. Fauci's lab at the NIH. So that was the very first time I learned of him, and started following his very important career in HIV/AIDS. Where I was working in this this time in this clinic at a time when that Dr. Fauci calls the dark years, when everybody was dying. It was a terrible, terrible time. But then go forward many years, I made a series about the research hospital that's on the grounds of the NIH called Building 10, the Clinical Research Center. And Dr. Fauci continues to do research and see patients there. And I interviewed him for that, along with his wife, who was the medical ethicist for that hospital.
And Janet, how did you first come to know of him?
I think, like lots of Americans, I sort of would see his name, in reading about epidemics or outbreaks, first in AIDS, then in Ebola. And we did a film, our group, on the 21st century threat of pandemics before COVID happened. And at the end of that film, Dr. Fauci and I and a couple other people were on a panel, and I met him, and I was brave enough to say, could we do a project together? And we started on a project on AIDS in the modern era. And then I thought, wow, someone should do a film on Dr. Fauci's life. And then John and I found each other, and we began.
And actually, I'll put this question to you, Janet. How did you and John connect and end up making this documentary together?
We had our group had started working on the beginnings of a film about Dr. Fauci before COVID. And then COVID exploded, and it was clear that Tony was at the center. He was at the White House every day in press conferences. He was at the center of the storm. And John Hoffman, who I'd met once before, reached out to me, and I knew of his illustrious career doing health documentaries at HBO and also having worked with everyone at NIH. And he said, you know, I just asked about doing a film about Dr. Fauci, and you just started something. And we decided to pair up because I knew we needed to pair up with the smartest, most knowledgeable, best filmmakers. And we added Aly Moss, our producer, to the group in order to do this film during a very intense, crazy time, which was essentially the beginning of lockdown, was when we went full tilt.
And John, I'll put this to you first. You know, despite being familiar with Dr. Fauci for many years, was there anything you learned over the process of making this documentary that really surprised you about him?
Well, yes, and it is the way that he is still so impacted by the loss of human life. He's a doctor. His life is devoted to saving lives. So he is deeply affected by not only the loss of a single life, but the loss of hundreds of thousands and now over 1 million American lives and many more around the world. And when we interviewed him the first time, and it was focused on the early part of his life and what I refer to as the dark years of AIDS. And I asked him to go back to that time. Unexpectedly, he became, he choked up as he was telling the story of a man who went blind from his HIV/AIDS and then eventually died. And that was a surprise. This man that, in studying the archive and making the film, we were watching hundreds, thousands of media appearances by him over the years. And he never once displayed that kind of emotion. Occasionally, he would get frustrated with an interviewer who was exhibiting sort of an intolerance, a kind of homophobia, and he would challenge the interviewer. But that was the only kind of sort of emotion that he displayed. So that was a surprise. But it showed us immediately in that first interview that he understood the seriousness of what we were doing and how different it was than any other media appearance.
And Janet, I'll put this one to you. It's interesting to see someone reflect on something, in their past. And I think one of the starkest things I've ever seen in anything is the old footage of Dr. Fauci meeting with ACT UP activists back in the 80s. And what was it like to see him recount that and possibly look on it, 30 years in the future?
John said it exactly right. I think what people don't know is that Tony wears his heart on his sleeve a lot once you cross the trust barrier. And so he also got choked up. We played him his speech at that meeting in audio, and he got choked up listening to it because I think he has become really good friends with some of the key ACT UP activists. You saw a number of them, David, Peter in the film. Peter is one of his best friends. And to, I think, look back at his history of what they were all able to do together to build bridges and then to change research. And they changed it not only for AIDS patients, but they changed it for breast cancer patients and all other patients and rare disease patients, because they created a model where patients in the community must be part of research decisions and the scientific process.
And John, I'll put this to you first, and then Janet, please add anything you would like to. But what personality traits of Dr. Fauci do you think are trademarked to him, but he, when you have to do so much media like he has done, you kind of have to put up a guard and put up a very serious facade. Is there something that you think people would be pleasantly surprised to know about his personality?
I think that people would appreciate knowing how much of a family man he is, how devoted he is to his daughters and wife. I think people would appreciate knowing what a great sense of humor he has. And there's material that Janet shot that when I explained to you why we didn't use it, I think everybody will understand. It was Tony at work on a Saturday, spending the entire day working at his computer, often as a stand-up desk, listening and singing along to Barbra Streisand. And it was just, I found it just hilarious to watch. And he's absolutely in the zone. He's working hard. He's writing papers. He's editing text, but he's just singing along. We never could get the rights to that, so it's not in the film.
And Janet, is there anything? I don't think anything could top that, but is there anything that you feel personally about that?
I will add that he also plays the village people and really enjoys the village people on weekends to work, right? When we all heard it, we're like, really? Awesome, the village people. He's quite mischievous. He has a really, as John said, really good sense of humor. And he also is on the more serious side. To be honest, in a lifetime of seeing and meeting a lot of hardworking people, he may be the hardest working, most disciplined human being about work I have ever seen. It's, at now over 80, it is stunning to see day after day after day.
Well, John and Janet, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our panel in just a little bit.
Thank you.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm speaking with Jenna Furst and Julia Willoughby Nason, who are the directors of LuLaRich on Amazon Prime, about the LuLaRoe legging company and everything and the multi-level marketing scheme that it was. First question I want to ask is, why is it misguided to think that cults only involve religions?
That's a great question. Charlie, I think when you lift the hood up in our culture, most of what you find in culture is a cult, but I think where we start to kind of, find more fertile ground for documentaries and investigations and criminal findings is when those highly controlling environments, abuse people, mislead them, deceive them, cause them to lose a lot of money, cause them to hurt their families and hurt their communities. So I think in this case, cult is probably one of the most pervasive things we experience in late stage capitalism, but there's some cults that do more damage than others. And
so I think one of the things that's most surprising about the series is that you actually got Deanne and Mark Stidham to actually participate, sit down for an interview. And did that take a lot of persuasion to have them participate in the project?
No, we didn't have to persuade them. We just were very direct and talked to them about hey, there's these controversies about you. We're doing this documentary. Here's our past work, fire fraud, etc. We like to show a full picture of everybody and have them speak to their own story as opposed to us just telling their story without them. I think that they wanted to get ahead of the narrative, essentially, because there was so much controversy and speak for themselves, and understood that we were really going to sit with them for a while. We sat with them for about 6 or 7 hours in their interview. So they appreciated that invitation, essentially. We didn't have to persuade. Luckily.
Did you try to reach out? Did you try to reach out to, since it really was a family operation, did you try to reach out to other members of the family to see if they wanted to talk about their side?
Yeah, definitely. We did. And we did talk to other family members. Essentially, it was a 4-part series, so we could only fit in so much. I mean, there's just so much talk about a second season, a scripted version, because of the content that was left on the cutting room floor, and because just their family alone is like is a fascinating, docu-follow or whatever kind of show you would want to contextualize it as. But yes, we did reach out to family members and we wanted to know more.
Yeah, Sam Schultz.
Other people wanted to know more too.
Yeah, Sam Schultz, the nephew, had a very inside perspective, in the forming of the company and a lot of things people didn't see. And, the family itself, just Deanne's generation and the, her children and the grandchildren is about 100 people. So, it's a lot of perspectives. And I think that ultimately they are the leaders of the family, and that's the culture they created, is that, Deanne and Mark, are seen as the sort of ultimate authority. And I think what's so interesting is you have family businesses, but when family businesses become multi-billion-dollar companies and the only people in the C-suite are the men from that family, regardless of what their experience is, I think that you can probably see how train wrecks are inevitable.
Yeah, most definitely. It's interesting you bring up about, that whole family thing, because it's mentioned in the documentary about, they're a Mormon family, and Mark would be quoting things and comparing himself to Joseph Smith. But it really feels like that was a much heavier gloss on things. Did that really color a lot of that, of what they were all about in terms of that religiosity?
Yes.
I think that, just to quickly, I think that they really were all about the entrepreneurship and about like that positive language in terms of like this performance art around like just wish it to be true. And it kind of folds into some of the Joseph Smith and that era and later eras of self-help and just, positive thinking. So it kind of like it morphed into something else out of their religion. I think it became like a cult of personality, essentially.
Yeah, I think Mormons, have been persecuted, right? And so sometimes they get turned into, even us describing them as Mormons,
Right.
I think people who are members of the Church of Latter-day Saints call themselves LDS. And, I think the irony of the LDS community is they have been the staging ground for multi-level marketing from the beginning. And the reason why is because so much of that culture promotes a patriarchal order in which the women are not supposed to work. And so when the women are not supposed to work and have a career, this is viewed as a way to make extra money.
I would just like to say women are not supposed to get paid for their work.
Right.
That's
women
very
are
different
obviously
than
working
working
around the clock, doing tons of different things. But I'm just referring to this patriarchal lens. My word choice may not be exactly right, but the lens of this stay-at-home mom, this sort of working on your spare time, keeping your kids first. And here's a great way to make extra money, was what propelled the Tupperware parties. It's what propelled Amway. It's what propelled Mary Kay. And I think that there was a roadmap out of that into other communities that may not have been LDS, but LDS is where you find many victims of multi-level marketing, so much so that Utah, created a whole unit of criminal investigation for multi-level marketing, because of, the connections to the LDS community.
I think one of the surprising things about the documentary is that, is that there is this very humorous tone to it. It's not necessarily, I would say, a comedic, but there are definitely very humorous parts, even as different subjects are talking about various things. And I'm wondering, when you first started the project, did you think that the final product would have as much of that humorous tone to it as it ended up having?
Yes. And I think that, Julia and I, interestingly enough, when we were kind of coming towards rounding the bend on the series, we were like, this is a true comedy. We came up with a new genre, right? Everybody knows true crime, everybody knows true con, and we called it a true comedy. And the reality is that we saw so many similarities with Fire Fraud, which we saw as both a true con and a true comedy, that we understood the language for telling a story like this. But I think, to your point, people enjoy laughing. And I think laughing is healthy, especially when we're willing to laugh at ourselves. And I think that none of our films ever poke fun at people and laugh at them as a spectacle or as a point of exploitation. We're ultimately laughing at ourselves, because in the end, all of our films present a world in which there are no bad people who do horrible things. And we just need to pick those people out of the lineup and throw them away forever, take the key and throw it into the ocean, and then all the problems will be gone. That's not the world we live in. We're actually part of the problem. And I think that all of our work has, shown that. And so if you look at the content ecosystem right now, documentaries we're in the golden age, and there's a lot of really intense storytelling. We've done that type of storytelling. You mentioned Welcome to Leith. We also did Time, the Khalif Browder story. We did, the Trayvon Martin story, Rest in Power, with his family. We've covered some really intense, important, The Pharmacist, about the opioid epidemic. But what we found is that if you want to really reach people and you want to be able to have a conversation that can get into the most amount of homes around the world, if you can allow people to laugh a little bit, that it helps us all take our guard down and actually take the content more seriously and not put up the wall, which is happening, which is, hey, if that's intense or that involves something about people being hurt, I don't want to look at it, And I think that people, rightfully so, are so bombarded with the 24-hour news cycle that they need to find a way into these stories that feels, kind and gentle enough to be able to go the whole way. Because we want nothing more than for people to finish the fourth part, to get all the way through the series, to realize by the second and third part that, hey, this is actually criminal. People got hurt, people lost their lives, people lost their homes. And seduction and comedy and goofiness was all part of the con in the beginning. That's how people fell for it.
Exactly. We wanted to kind of do the same thing that the founders did with their audience with building an MLM. We wanted to build that with our film audience, and then elaborate. And then once they're in, understand like the depth and the stakes that were at play in the story.
Well, Julia and Jenner, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to talking with you in our panel in just a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Bye.
I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and as part of our Meet the Experts panel for TV documentaries, we're speaking with Aly Raisman from the TV documentary Darkness to Light on Lifetime, Donny Jackson of Dear on Apple TV, John Hoffman and Janet Tobias of Fauci on Disney Plus, and Julia Willoughby Nason and Jenner Furst from LuLaRich on Prime Video. The first question I want to ask, and I want to ask this to John first, is what were the documentary films or programs that made you say, that's what I want to do? I want to do that.
Oh man, as the oldest person on this panel, I'm sure, let's go way, way back. It's hard for me to think about what in the early 1980s was a source of inspiration for me to become a documentarian. First film that I made in college, and decided, it was in the last month of school, I said, this is what I'm gonna do with the rest of my life. And then so I just came to New York with that film and, hustled my way into some paying jobs.
And what about you, Janet?
Hoop Dreams. I grew up in Indiana, and I saw Hoop Dreams and magic, like the intimacy, the getting to know people, the story, the caring at the end desperately about them.
And what about Julia? How about you?
I'd say Pull My Daisy, even though it's not a classic doc, it's kind of voyeuristic verite doc to me.
And Jenner?
Yeah, it was Salesman. When I saw what the Maisels had done with that and really all of their work early as a filmmaker in my teens, I said that this is really, it's amazing. It's as powerful as a scripted film.
Donny?
It was Errol Morris's Thin Blue Line. It was realizing how dramatic you can make a documentary, in the same way that you can make a scripted film dramatic.
And Aly, I know you're not a filmmaker, but what were there any documentaries that you've seen that have had a big impact on you in your life?
I think, to be honest, there's many things that I've watched in my life, I think, that have had an impact, but I think what inspired, working on the show was actually just like my everyday interactions with survivors, of just meeting so many people from all over the world. And honestly, this sounds so negative, but I guess I feel like hopefully the show reminded people that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But I just really saw like how many people are struggling and how many people can relate to my experience. So I think that has had the biggest impact on me, that had inspired me to do the film. I know it's a very different answer than other people, but I mean, there's a lot of amazing documentaries out there, but I think just I'm inspired by people sharing their stories and speaking their truth.
And this next question, I want to loosen this up a little, because I think documentaries often get a rap of being immensely depressing, and a lot of them are. But I think there's also there's so many great documentaries that you can watch and you feel just really good watching them, and they just make you feel good whenever you watch it. And I'm wondering, for any of you, what is that documentary that makes you feel that way? And I want to start with you, Donny.
Wow, the Tiger King is crazy, but it's still telling the story. It's still giving you an amazing glimpse at humanity, at its extremes. And to be able to do that and still not go off the rails where you stop taking it seriously as a document of human behavior is pretty miraculous.
What about you, John?
What popped into my head was The Eyes of Tammy Faye. And it just was such a immersion into a world that I found so intriguing when I would flip by it on, whatever UHF channels that they were on when I was young. But I thought that Fenton and Randy did an amazing job sort of elevating Tammy Faye in everyone's eyes and bringing out, the profound humanity that she had and the love for people. And they just really, undid so many, assumptions that the viewers had about her. It was, just an explosion in terms of the way that they made the film.
How about you, Janet?
I think there are a bunch, but just I'll name one that's sort of recent that just makes you feel good about a young girl, Eagle Huntress, which was the story of a young girl who was the first girl to hunt with an eagle in Mongolia and win the prize in the competition. And it just, you look at her, the love of her father teaching her and her doing it and her pride. And it just makes you feel great about family and girls and life.
And what about you, Jenner?
Honestly, one of the greatest sources of comfort viewing for me is David Attenborough. And I think to overlook that as part of our documentary culture is to miss something. I mean, the fact that I can completely take a break from human beings and go on a spellbinding journey through one of the most beautiful cinematic experiences that you could ever imagine, and all of it is real. And I can listen to David Attenborough with all of his quirks. It's honestly one of the joys of my life.
And Julia?
I love David Attenborough too, but I would say Paris is Burning, because it shows, it just shows like the resilience of being creative and how that can basically save someone's life in a lot of ways, even though in that film there were people that unfortunately lost their lives. It shows how precious life is in general. And I love seeing the place I grew up in at the time I grew up in it, in New York.
And what about you, Aly?
I'm going to agree. I would say the David Attenborough is definitely, I love watching those documentaries. I think that it's just incredible. I love watching them. It's so beautiful and so amazing. And then I also really enjoyed, there was, that I remember, a Jane Goodall episode of Dear X, and that was really incredible because I think that it really did a great job of keeping it positive, but also a call to action of like, we all need to be aware of what's going on in the planet. And I think that David Attenborough does a really incredible job of that, of showing the beauty of the planet and the animals, but also, you know, a really important call to action that, you know, we all need to wake up and take care of our planet and appreciate it and not take it for granted.
And wrapping this up, you know, I think, you know, you learn so much when you're making you know, art about things that have actually happened. And I'm curious as to what's the best lesson you learned in life through your experience in making nonfiction? And I want to start with you, Janet.
Someone once said, and I think it continues, is that being a great director or producer is about being a human being that listens and is kind. And even when you are doing investigative work, I think that is true.
John?
Well, none of our work would exist if we didn't have trust, if we weren't able to instill trust in the subjects. And so to repeatedly enter into these trust relationships as we're making the films is such a challenge to who we are as people. And so if we are not honest, if we are not, you know, true, then people are not going to trust us. So we have to be really examining ourselves over and over and over again as we enter into every single one of the relationships that we have with anybody we're putting on camera, whether they are at the center of the film or, you know, secondary. It's a constant analysis that we have to go through of ourselves. And so, you know, really exploring trust is a fascinating thing to do over and over again.
And Aly?
I think I learned a lot from the experience. It was my first time ever doing a project like this, and I felt such a sense of responsibility because so many survivors were sharing their stories for the first time, and the first time publicly. And so I think it's a important reminder, something that I had to keep reminding myself, and, you know, something we talked about a lot on set and leading up to the set, and actually even after, was that everyone, that no matter how strong they may look when they're on camera, you know, these are real people who are really struggling and having ups and downs, and we might, you know, meet them on a day where they're having a really hard time, and just kind of remembering to meet people where they're at, I think, is really important. And, you know, it's such a it's hard when you're trying to tell someone's real story because they've experienced so much trauma, and I just think it's really important to be really sensitive to that. And you know, I've been on sets before where, you know, it's, you know, so like really, really long days, like 10, 12 hours on set, but this was a really different, it was still long days, but we really made sure to keep saying, if you need water, you can get up, you can go call someone, you can go see a therapist. We tried to make it a lot more of a sensitive environment. I think that's really how it should be. And I'm hoping, whether or not you're talking about trauma, like that's just the environment that's at workplaces. It should be, we should create spaces where, people don't have to explain themselves that they're having a really tough time or they're going through something really hard. So I just learned that everyone's battling something. And even if they seem really strong on camera and they're not emotional, it's still important to check in and make sure that they're doing okay, make sure they have a support system. And, sometimes when we're filming, oftentimes we go home and sometimes you're traveling, you're in a hotel room by yourself. And so I think it's important to remember that even if they seem like they're having a good day, we still have to check on them and make sure that they're doing all right and they feel okay after they're like letting everything sit in. It's a lot. So I feel very grateful for everyone that poured their heart out into the project. It was a lot, and we asked a lot of the survivors, and they blew me away. And so I'm really grateful that they took the time to share their stories with us.
Donny?
Yeah, thanks for that question, by the way. And Aly, greetings from Dear, who you graced season 1 so beautifully.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on that, by the way. That was very special.
Oh, fantastic. I love the question. Look, I'm a psychologist by training, and so I've been doing TV for a really long time. So it's for me, it's more about not what I learned so much as what I was reminded of. The biggest takeaway from my training as a shrink is how alike we are, and how easy it is to forget that when you see people who are in exalted positions or have jobs that we're never going to aspire to. But the leveling that I think Dear does is just a reminder for me of how ultimately alike we are. And the more specific you are with those stories, the more universal emotionally, you're able to reach. And so you have a surfer over here, you have an amazing actor in Viola Davis, you have a multi-hyphenate with Billy Porter, et cetera. And then you have, Malala Yousafzai, a Nobel Prize, Peace Prize winner. But what we learn from that diversity is the commonalities of our experience emotionally. And for me, that's a lesson I don't want to forget. And so Dear was just a beautiful reminder of that.
What about you, Jenner?
I think that obviously you're making a movie or a television show, and it's easy to forget that the telling of a story can be therapeutic, whether you're a therapist or not. And the essence of trauma is not being seen and heard, right? That's the essence of trauma. So to do a film is, in a sense, unwinding a lot of experiences for people, just to be there with the lights on them, with the camera rolling, with you asking detailed questions, caring about what they have to say. And, it's just so powerful. We were on the set of our new Amazon series that we're doing about the intersection of reality TV, Christian fundamentalism, and patriarchy. And a lot of the work that you've done, Aly, dovetails into the work we were doing. And we were sitting with someone and they were so nervous sitting down. And Julia said, would you like to sit where I'm sitting for a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
And, the woman got up and sat in the director's chair and we just kept talking. And, that's kind of what we get to do. And I couldn't think of anything more powerful than to be able to do that for a living, to be able to do that as our vocation. It's honestly a master's class in 1,000 different subjects, but it's also a lesson in humanity 24 hours a day.
And what about you, Julia?
Yeah, I would say, listening is a huge gift, and it's this career of being a documentarian is, I'm so grateful to continue to practice that gift that I have, and that I can hone and refine and question in myself, if I'm a good listener or not, and what really the definition of being a good listener is in practice. I would say also really what has helped, what I've learned from being a documentarian is just to see the nuance in everything. And to a lot of the subjects we've covered are super polarizing and very third rail in black and white terms of understanding two sides of a story. And for me to really understand where I might be prejudiced that I might not be aware of myself, and to give into that and just be really humble about that.
Well, Aly, John, Janet, Julia, Jenner, and Donny, thank you so much for joining us on this panel. We wish you all the best over this season. And don't forget to go to goldderby.com and make your predictions for this year's Emmys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.